I just want to introduce Ken Rossi, Dr. Ken Rossi, and he is an assistant professor of organization development and change at Hawaii Pacific University. He is my friend and colleague, and he is also the faculty chair for the Masters of Organization Development and Change at Hawaii Pacific University. Before joining HPU, Dr. Rossi served at NASA's Organization and Organization Development Training Center, working out of the Ames Research Center in Mountain View, California. Dr. Rossi's research is in the area of leadership development, and he's currently conducting research on the impact of simulations on leadership and org behavior. Prior to joining NASA, Dr. Rossi ran a career transition program, satellite campus operation, and served in the U.S. Army as a leader, trainer, and org effectiveness consultant and educator. He has his doctorate in educational leadership from the University of Southern California, a master's degree in human resource management and org development, and a master's degree in counseling from Chapman University, a bachelor's degree in psychology from Chaminade, and is a graduate of the U.S. Army Organizational Effectiveness Staff Officer School at Fort Ord, California. And he is also a senior registered OD professional. Dr. Rossi has worked extensively throughout the US, the Pacific, including Samoa, Thailand, Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Panama, and other areas of South and Central America. And we are so excited to hear from you today. And here is some information on the Masters of Arts in Org Development and Change. And I should, in the spirit of true confessions, I should share with you that I am an alum of HPU, a double alum with my undergrad and my master's at HPU as well. So welcome, Dr. Rossi.
Thank you.
Could you just tell a little bit as we get started, what got you started in change management?
I started my connection to this when I was in the military. At the end of the Vietnam War, the U.S., the Army specifically, was faced with a bunch of issues that had to do with drug abuse, racial issues, those kinds of things. At the same time, they transitioned from a draft army to an all-volunteer army. So the Army put together a program called the Organizational Effectiveness Program, with the intention of intervening with issues at lower levels. Specifically to the Army, it was captain, company commander, and below. It was very humanistic, social psychology kinds of things. And as part of that program, they developed a series of training courses for junior leaders, and one was called the Leadership Management Development Course, LNMDC. The title didn't actually cover what was in it, because it was basically OD skills, the ability to communicate better, to interact with people, to identify issues and work with those. And I was part of attended one of the pilot courses, which changed the whole way I looked at things. It impacted the way I served for the rest of the time I was in the military. And about 10 years later, I was working as a leader in an infantry unit. We walked for a living, and I broke my foot in a training accident. And to hide me for a while till my foot healed, I was assigned to the Organizational Effectiveness School, which was at Fort Ord, where I was stationed at the time. So I got the opportunity to work on the ground with the Army's OD program. And I taught in the school course. I was able to attend the course, which was a graduate level program. It was 6 months long, 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. Great program. And I worked in it until the program went away.
So Bill has a question.
Okay.
How has remote work and work from home made the work of ODC practitioners easier or more difficult?
Well, I can't speak specifically to it. I can speak, how going to teaching OD skills remote,
Mhm.
you lose something. You really do. You can do many of the same things, but it's the physical interaction with people that allows you to get closer to them, to understand them more, to be able to, one of the things we do commonly is we'll assess culture in an organization. And that's really hard to do remotely. You can't see people interacting. I mean, like we look at a webinar or we look at a Zoom meeting and you can see people speaking, but you don't know how they interact. You don't know how they behave, those kinds of things. So I think it's going to make, it makes things more difficult. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but it does take away some of the abilities that you have. Just like teaching the classes. The classes are interactive and I want my students to talk to each other, to learn from each other, and you lose something with that delay you have on an online meeting. And even with a situation like this where you're working synchronously, but you still lose something. So I guess the bottom line is there is a loss if you can't get together with people physically.
Bill says he agrees. Without face-to-face interactions, some org members seem to resist change. Yeah, I think it's a muscle that we're going to need to develop. Don't you? I mean, I feel like this virtual world is not going away anytime soon. And yeah, I think we're going to have to adapt, right? And figure out ways to create that connection online.
I think eventually we'll get to the point where we can do better at it as more people
Yeah.
become comfortable with this environment.
Mhm.
Uh, when I switched to online with my classes in the spring of 2020, even though we had been meeting face to face, when it came to meeting like this, it took them a while to get connected, to begin to open up and talk more and actually interact more. And so I think eventually we'll be able to develop a better way to do this, but we'll never be able to get away from the face-to-face. We're always going to have to interact with people face-to-face. And when we look at those kinds of organizations that can't go virtual, it's easy to talk about this when we look at organizations that can do things virtually, but there are those out there who can't, and they're going to be having to deal with issues related to change, the way they do business, how they function. Just think about a hospital where a lot of our work may come in the near future, or restaurants and hotels, places where you've got people interacting on a regular basis. We're going to have to be able to get involved there. We can't sit virtually and work with the people who are working face to face every day. So I think for us, it'll be adding an extra set of skills without losing the skills we have for interacting face to face.
And I just want to welcome, so many people are still coming, and I want to welcome you, excuse me. And if you have a question, feel free to add it into the chat, but also feel free to ask it, raise your hand, speak out. I mean, we really want this to be an exchange today. Oh, excellent question. Christian says, so what has changed? I'm going to throw that to you, Ken.
Well, for those of us in the education world, anybody who's a scholar and educator, change is what we do for a living. We change people, which is why there's such a connection between org change and education programs. Why EDDs around the country are doing change as part, because that's what we do. And change is anything that comes along that requires people to behave differently, to do things differently. So a lot of what we normally see is changing job descriptions, changing the kinds of work people do, bringing in new technology, those kinds of things. And that physical change drives the need to change people's behaviors. You know, Bill and I work together in the information systems program at HPU. And one of the things you find with technology is when organizations bring in new technology and it fails, it doesn't fail because the technology is bad. It fails because the people who have to use it haven't been properly connected to it. There's actually a change model called the technology acceptance model, where we look at how easy is this thing to use, how the perceived ease of use, and how useful it is. And one of the things you find when you're looking at technology projects is nobody takes the time to explain to potential users why it's going to make their job better or make their job easier or make them more productive. And that's, you know, when I looked at that years ago, when I did some work at NASA, we dealt with that. And then ease of use, you know, ease of use is less of an issue now for younger kids because they grew up with it. You get to the older folks who were, you know, in jobs that didn't have technology, but as technology came in, there was always that fear that it was going to take my job away, or it's too difficult to use. You know, they can use email, they can use Facebook. When it comes to using the tool at work, is a little more difficult. And that comes down to two sides. One is training them so they understand, and the other comes down from the side of those who develop it, you know, to make them easy to use, make them more intuitive, which is still a problem in some cases.
The intervention, right? The intervention, the sales pitch, right? To get them excited about the change sometimes is missing.
Well, it's that, it's making sure they understand that we're going to prepare them to use it. You know, if you think of Lewin's model, when you talk about psychological safety, you know, that where they're going is going to be a safe place, as safe as what it was before.
Right.
So that involves the training, letting them learn how to use it, showing them how it makes their job easier, and those kinds of things. So change, back to the original question, change comes from everywhere. I mean, it's anything we do on a daily basis. And when we institute changes, no matter what kind of organization we're looking at, we have to look at how behavior needs to change or how folks need to act. The one that throws me, that kills me is, you know, when organization leaders say, well, we're going to change culture. Well, that's not as easy to change as what you might think. It's, you know, culture is so deeply ingrained in people that we can change surface things, but we really don't get to the depth of culture, which is why a lot of change activities have problems when we move through them. And like I said, the biggest one is, well, I'm going to change culture. And generally I'll tell them, no, you're not. It's a lot more difficult than just doing that.
So Greg says, I think online is an undiscovered asset as an online faculty member, maybe starting with hybrid face-to-face to develop those societal niceties and trust, and then moving to online.
There's a great value to hybrid.
There's
a great value to online education.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found in the, you know, over 20 years I've been doing this is teaching online is actually more difficult than teaching face-to-face. Because when I walk into the classroom, and I have class tonight, when I walk into the classroom, I spend about 3 hours with my students doing all these different things, talking, interacting, doing activities, those kinds of things. When I teach the same class online, I turn it on Sunday night. Monday morning, I'm up first thing in the morning, even earlier than this, looking to see if they're interacting yet. So I discuss and talk with my students 3 times a day, 7 days a week, which ends up in some cases being a lot longer, a lot more time commitment. And that's what some, I don't know, there's probably less now than there used to be, but there's, you know, that's something that many faculty don't understand, and they think it's an easy thing. And when you engage properly, it is a great tool, because I look at it that I'm able to have students in class that come from all over the world. You know, that's, and it adds that kind of depth to the class because you have different
Right.
kinds of people interacting. And if we can get them all together in the room at the same time, then you get to learn more about other cultures and everything that way. So it's a little more, you lose some of that, but what you gain, I think, is valuable. And I think online education is here to stay. I don't think I hope it doesn't replace face-to-face because there are, a program like this, like mine, you really do gain a lot more by being face-to-face. You're going to learn online. You're going to walk away with the same sets of skills and abilities, but you're going to be missing something. And it's that ability to really interact with people. In a couple of my classes, we have a couple of periods where we actually do synchronous work. I run simulations in the class, so everybody has to be there at the same time. And they're usually team-based, so as long as the whole team can come together, then they can do their thing. So we get a chance to work synchronously that way. Unfortunately for me, it means if I have 20 people in a class, there's 5 people on a team. I may have one team on at 9 o'clock in the morning, the next one on at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the next one. And so my days get really long, but it's really kind of cool to watch the interaction with an online group. And so as we can get more and more of those kinds of things, simulations that require them, I think we're going to really grow with online.
Ken, Christian says, isn't instituting change, in fact, instituting stability, only a different kind of stability than before?
Well, part of the change process is getting to a point where they are stable. When you start to change how we function, how we do the business we work in, whatever it happens to be, then what we don't want is people constantly talking about the way we used to do it. We used to do it this way. We want them to get to a point where they feel as though this is the way we've always done. And so that's when we get some stability. But, in many cases, in many kinds of work opportunities, the change is going to be constant. Either we're going to be changing, the organization itself, or the people they work with are changing. A new opening that I picked up in the program is I start working with some of the students in our sustainability program. And they've come to realize that what they do is change. And they have to change people's behaviors, change people's thoughts. We understand that climate change is here. We can deny it all day long, but it's here. And how do we get more people to understand that they need to change their behaviors? And those won't probably never become stable. They'll be constantly changing behavior as we adjust and adapt to the changes in the climate. Look at COVID. How much change has taken place with COVID, and how many people have fought the change. And you look at it, you understand that I'm fully vaccinated, and I was in the military, so I get vaccinated anyway, but I'm used to them. But for those, most of us have grown up. I don't think there's anybody that grew up in the United States that maybe a few of us here that remember what it was like to see polio. I went to high school with kids who had polio, so I remember polio. And I remember the vaccinations, and I remember going away. And so we know that these vaccinations do help, but the amount of misinformation out there has caused people to say, well, I don't believe in it. I don't think it's going to work. It's going to do this to me. I'm afraid of it. Almost like technology. I'm afraid of it. I don't see the value to it. And changing people's perception about that is a new tool for the public health folks, who I'm also getting students from public health in my program. They understand the need not just to look at programs and create programs, but to change the way people view the program, to change the way people view their lives, and change their view of science. Most of us have always believed in science. And now you're getting people saying, well, because the scientists change what they're telling us, that they're wrong. Well, if we know science says every time I learn something new, I'm going to tell you. What are the
Right.
new things? What are the new ways to adapt? Those kinds of things. And so uh, I think in many cases, change is going to become a constant. Uh,
Yeah.
how we deal with change as we go along, how we adjust, and how people are brought on board so that their behaviors change in line with what we're doing.
There's so many wonderful comments in the chat and questions. Roland says, we scholars and practitioners have to be willing to change ourselves before we can help students and clients adapt to change.
Yeah, can I speak to that for a
Yeah,
moment?
absolutely.
I mean, I think that one of the biggest challenges that all of us, any of us, have faced in dealing with change and helping others to deal with change. By the way, I don't agree that we change people. We don't change people. We help people to understand what's going on so that they can decide for themselves if they're going to change. But I think that the most important thing that I am confronted with, and I believe we all are confronted with, is what change do I have to make in myself? How do I have to deal with my own internal resistance to change? How can I develop a mindset? How can I change my mindset, not develop, but change my mindset from one that focuses on my own comfort and develop a mindset that says, as I think about how comfortable I want to be, how can I use myself to help others get as comfortable as they want to be with the change that we're all experiencing? So, I mean, at the end of the day, I think I certainly agree with Ken that change is it's inevitable. It simply is. Change is. There's no question about it, right? And I think there was a comment earlier that I saw in the chat regarding the need, perhaps, or the value of starting with building trust. Where is that? It said. Online is an undiscovered asset, maybe starting with hybrid face-to-face to develop social niceties and then trust. Trust is a big part of being effective in working with change in the virtual world that we're living in right now. We know how important it is in the face-to-face world, and I believe that we want to feel that we are in a trusting relationship and environment, in a face-to-face environment. Excuse me. And there are a lot of cues that we get in our interaction with people that help us to determine or to assess whether or not it's a trusting relationship. It's harder online in a virtual environment, but not impossible. Right. I'm going to put a plug in for ISODC's conference, which is coming up in April, which will be a hybrid conference.
Yep.
Will be a hybrid conference where we acknowledge the fact that with people around the globe not being able to come together face to face, and yet wanting to participate in the conference, how do we make that happen? So I think we as practitioners and as scholars have to deal with our own resistance to change. It was really comfortable doing things face to face, and all of a sudden I now have to do it, looking at however many squares are on my screen, so.
That's a great point. And if you want to learn more about the conference, go to isodc.org, right? Bill asks, why do leaders want grand macro level strategic and cultural changes when these macro level changes rely on a pyramid of smaller micro level changes to be successful? Project management is one way to look at that pyramid, and the ODC field does an excellent job of reconciling those macro and micro challenges.
I think that's one of the problems that we see in a lot of different places, is looking at the macro without looking at what's happening down on the on the shop floor, where the nurses are meeting the patients, those kinds of things. It's one of the reasons with the leadership course that I teach as part of the program, is I don't focus on, mid-level and senior level leaders. I focus on those who are down at the cutting edge, if you will. We used to call it in the military the pointed end of the bayonet, because senior leaders who have been trained to work at mid-level and upper management, they don't understand the impact of their decisions and their actions on the lower levels. They make a decision and 30 people lost a job, big deal. They don't understand what those 30 people have gone through. So understanding what's happening at that lower level is critical for us, so we know what we're dealing with when we're dealing with our client organizations. But it's also helping them understand the bottom end of that pyramid, why things work. If no matter what you say you want done, if you don't get people to believe in that, and it's up to the leader, not us, and we're going to show them how, but if you can't get your people to believe in it, the reason why it's going to work, or why we're doing this, then they're not going to come along. They'll act like they're doing it, the old walk the walk. They're going to act like they're doing it, but they're not going to walk the talk. They're not going to back up what they're saying with actions, and that's a tough thing to look at, because it's really hard to get some leaders to look down at that lower level and understand why these changes have to happen.
Go ahead.
I got involved with the Army's transition program following Desert Storm. The Army and most of DoD went through a massive downsizing. And unlike previous downsizing, following Vietnam, they had a RIF, and people would go to work one day and they'd get a notice and then they were out of the job. When this process began, two things happened. One, that there were programs put together to help people transition. It was a relatively new kind of process. And the second thing is the Chief of Staff of the Army moved down with subordinate leaders and passed the message on face to face to literally every soldier in the Army, all the way down to the squad and platoon level. And that's what has to happen to get people to buy into the changes, which means leaders have to be willing to get down to that level and walk the talk. Talk about it. Explain to people that you may lose your job. You may be out of a job, but it's important you continue working, and we're going to help you transition out when it's that time. But this is why we're doing it. And when people begin to understand that, the macro level changes come a little bit easier. If we don't do it that level, then they're going to happen, but it's going to be a tough row, and you're going to be a very difficult time keeping people on board with it. And this is where we have loss of people. People leave because they feel uncomfortable. There's no safety there.
I've also seen situations where if the senior leaders say nobody's going to lose their job, you always lose a certain amount of people through attrition or, retirement, but, those that are here are not going to lose their job. Oh my gosh, that makes the change management process so much easier, because fear is a big factor in changes sometimes in organizations. So we go ahead.
Well, saying that is important, but backing it up.
Yeah, that's true.
Nobody will lose their job, and then 6 months to a year into this transition, then people start getting laid off. Then nobody believes them anymore. So, along with people aren't going to lose their job, some have to understand that they will. This is going to happen, and the worst, bad news is news, and people are happier knowing what's going on rather than not knowing. And bad news coming, oh, by the way, a year down the road, destroys people's trust and belief in their leaders.
Yeah.
So if it's coming, you tell them. Communication is so valuable, so important, and a lot of times we bypass true communications to, for the plan. The plan is important, but having people understand why and how and what the impact on them is going to be. That provides a certain level of safety. And if you've got a program in place that's going to take care of those who lose their job as a result of this transition, then there's a greater likelihood you're going to keep them till the end. If you have nothing to help them, then they're going to leave. And so a lot of leaders won't tell them, but as soon as people start losing, then that's when you have the mass exodus. And you have to be really cautious of that, because then we have to deal with those issues of not having enough people to do our job until it's time, till we have the new things in place.
Ryan says, change is often uncomfortable, especially for individuals on the front lines. Are there ways to help ease this transition, especially when there are massive macro level changes occurring, many which they may not have a say in their organization's direction? Oh my gosh, you know, that is a great question. And also including the front lines and getting their feedback throughout the change process, I think is really important, don't you?
You know, we've learned over the years that, and this goes back to when I first started dealing with OD-like things, is the more you get the people in the front lines involved with what's going on, the greater the likelihood that it's going to be successful.
Yeah.
You tell them what needs to be done, you get their feedback and help them design the plan, even if it's a minimal amount.
Yeah.
They see themselves in it, and because they have a part of it, they're gonna work to get it to work. So it goes back to communications, our ability to interact and communicate with people at all levels. And if it means if we're working entirely at senior level, we have to coach them into getting down on the floor and talking to people. Nothing is more valuable than the CEO or the senior vice presidents going down and talking to people on the shop floor, wherever that front line happens to be, because they like it. They like to be, you know, to understand that they know I'm here. They know I have. And then if you ask them for some input, then all of a sudden they lighten up. They love that. And that's a hard thing to understand. You know, we have leaders who don't want to talk to people on the front line. And I've met those who have no desire at all to interact with people down on the shop floor, even though they're making decisions for them every day. And so helping them change their perspective, just like Roland was saying, we as the educators in this have to change how we do. The practitioners also have to change. We have to adapt new ways of doing things. And our ability to be, you know, when my son is a football coach, he played college football, and he always talked about having your head on a swivel, you know, being able to see what's going on all the way around you all the time. That's what we have to be. So we need to be that way. And then we need to help those we consult with, whether it's senior level or mid-level or even down at the lower level, to understand about how these things are going to happen, what the change means. Give me your input in what we need to do. And then incorporate that into what the overall plan will be. And then occasionally go back and talk to them, see how we're doing. Let's see, you know, in other words, looking at in-process reviews, you know, looking at the progress of what our change is doing, talking to those down below and find out what they're getting out of it. What do they feel? What do they see? Where can we you know, improve things? Where can we stop doing things? Because a big part of change is sometimes we stop doing some of the things we've been doing.
Yes, yes. And having the confidence and the emotional intelligence to be able to say that, right?
Yeah, you know, it's, you know, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to talk to people.
Right.
And unfortunately, in today's world, we have too many people that rely on texting. Now, we don't even do email anymore. We do texting now. And I mean, as a communication tool, it's phenomenal to get information out, to pass things along using, you know, a website to pass information along is great because information goes out, but it's impersonal. You know, even if I'm talking to somebody I know, the way the text comes in, you know, you can't tell what's behind it. You can't see the body language. You can't get the tone of voice from it. So even with the use of electronics for transmission, for information transmissions, we also need to be able to get down there and talk to them face to face. And in many cases, for, you know, not so much mid-level, but senior level leaders, they don't do a lot of that. You know, and whether it's because they never had to do it, or they've never felt comfortable doing it, or they think they're too important to do it. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why they don't do it, but they really need to understand the value of that. That's part of what the message we pass on to those we work with. And then, one of the critical things of getting change to happen is to get the leaders bought in on it. And the best way to get the senior leaders bought in is for them to go down and talk to the junior folks about what's going on. And that's why the Chief of Staff of the Army in 1991 called it chain teaching, where you had at least 2 levels of leaders going down below, sometimes more than that, and getting the message down to the lowest people, exactly what's going on, what the impact on them is going to be. But yeah, some of them are going to lose their job. We're going to get rid of some people. When the Army went from, I want to say right around 900,000 end strength in 1991 to about 540 in 1993.
Wow.
And it's not just eliminating 350,000 spaces, it's bringing in 150 to 200,000 people a year, new people coming in to fill in new jobs and everything. So to maintain that process, I mean, we had to do a lot of work. We went from a small contractor who provided outplacement consulting to the largest outplacement consulting company in the world. And we were dealing with 600, 700, 800 people a month coming through programs to help them transition out. And it made the process of, balancing and stabilizing the military much easier, because the people stuck with their jobs up until they got to that point where it's time to start going through the process, which is, it was really critical, and it made it work. It finally did work. It did a very good job. We made the same mistake they did after Vietnam, was they got rid of some of the wrong people, but that's who they choose to let go. But the process itself worked pretty well. It's still in place today, but they've taken away the human aspect. They no longer have the counselors in the sites that worked with the people. It provided the group training for how to deal, do question and answer. Now it's all electronic.
So it is all electronic, and we're living in a very different world.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that Ken, you made some reference to the use of technology and using messaging for not using email, but using text messages. I think that's the term you use. See, I'm a dinosaur. I didn't grow up with this with technology as some of you on this screen probably did. Some others of you are closer to my age, though you may not be dinosaurs, as I call myself. But here's the thing. I believe that it's important for us to figure out how to help the technology work for us, and not just feel as though it's something that we have to buy into without figuring out a way to make it work for us effectively. I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking out loud. I didn't have this thought before right now, but I don't know how to use emojis. But I do know that my grandkids do. And they probably use emojis to help communicate and convey their thinking, not just their thinking, but their feeling along with a message.
Yeah.
So that if, for example, we figured out as a society, if we're going to be using text messages, is there a way that we can at least attempt to communicate a sense of feeling, a sense of, whatever, by using an emoji along with that message? And that's just something that just popped into my head just now. Not that I will ever do it, because I don't know how to read emojis.
What it comes down to with that is, that's a change that the technology savvy have done, because they probably somebody realized that messages lose something without the emotional content. So these emojis, when I text, my kids don't call unless it's the end of the world. They both live in the mainland, and they text every day. My daughter will FaceTime me, say hello, how you doing? And then it follows up with 10 texts. And when I text them back, at the bottom of the phone is, you press a button and it brings up all these emojis. And after a while, you can begin to use them, but it's again, it's a change. We who don't use them have to change how we view them.
That's the resistance. That's the resistance in me that says, okay, Roland, all those emojis, that stuff's all there for your use. Figure out how to use it. Come on, give it the program, kid. I'm talking to myself.
And I saw an article last week that said in business communication, you shouldn't use emojis. It was a LinkedIn article. And I kind of disagreed because, I think it's important to know your audience. You probably don't put emojis on your cover letter, when you're trying to get a job. But I mean, I think if you know your audience, I think it can be a powerful way to express that emotion.
Yeah, and that's really all I'm saying. And certainly everything within moderation and with appropriateness and so forth, because I know that some of the emojis are intended to offend rather than intending to actually communicate a feeling of whatever, a positive feeling.
So Christian says, what are the trends in change management that now are weak, but could be strong in the next 10 years? Oh, that's a good question. What are the trends in change management that are weak now, but could be strong in the next 10 years?
I think it's the focus. We think too much on business transitions, business change. But I think we're going to have to start looking at a much broader place.
A holistic approach.
Well, it's a holistic approach on a global, national, and industry level. Is how do we deal with climate change? Climate change is not, it affects all of us, but it affects businesses differently than it affects governments. And one of the things that I've talked to you earlier about was, the issue of having a true systems perspective. I think we need to understand that, because we need to help those we work with, whether they're government or business or nonprofit leaders, how to think systemically, how to look at the systemic impacts of everything that happens. We can't just be making changes that cause a shift in the way we do business without understanding the impact it has on those in the environment, the local communities are a much higher level. How do we deal with things from that perspective? We've talked about, I learned systems thinking when I went through the early Army OE programs years ago. And we looked at systems models to help us diagnose an organization. And that's really cool, because it takes into the impact that everything that happens within the organization impacts something else in the organization. But we also need to start thinking broader. We need to start looking at public health issues. We have to look at things like homelessness and, education. Are we educating people to meet the needs of the future? So that changes, starts looking at changes that start at, 5 and 6 years old, because when they graduate from high school, what's the work life going to look like? What's the world going to look like? If we're looking at from an industry perspective, where are the employees coming from 20 years from now? If we look at the United States, the birth rate is a little bit down. The population is aging. There's more of us older people in the workforce. I think about people my age. When I was a kid, they were on death's bed. And now I know so many people who are my age and older still working. They're healthier. They can do it. Retirement isn't what they thought it was going to be, those kinds of things. But eventually they're not going to be here. Where does this next generation of workers come from?
I'm curious about, if I may, just because I was flipping through the chat to see where Christian shows up, and Christian is in Norway. I wonder if if Christian, your understanding or your sense of change in your part of the world is, how is it similar or different from what you're hearing those of us who are here in North America prattling about?
I actually don't know if the thank you very much for the question. I don't know if the general trends in change are different. I think the theories that I look at about change are a little bit different. So for instance, a theory that I look at is Robert Chia and Haradimus Tsoukas. They are talking about organizational becoming, and they say the following thing: until now, we look at change as a characteristic of something, of an organization, of an individual. So there is an individual organization that changes into something else, but that's still an organizational individual. They are talking about the fact of looking at change as the process, constant process in which organizations, for instance, are an instance. So they shift the paradigm. So this is kind of the perspective I'm coming from. Otherwise, there are different social structures, there are different, but the general global trends are the same.
Yeah. I appreciate hearing that. And I was curious, and I think that one of the things that as scholar practitioners in a world that is rapidly shrinking, that it's important for us to be aware that a lot of what we in the West, and I say the West meaning primarily North America, how we talk about organization development and change comes from a perspective and point of view that may be very much different in other parts of the globe.
That's a great comment. Ken, can you say a little bit more about the MAODC program and who should be interested in that program?
I'm glad to sell it. The program has been around for about 25 years. Initially, it was a strong culture focus. The program founder, some of you know Jerry Glover, was a cultural anthropologist, so there was a great focus on culture. It evolved over time, and we've changed, we talk about change, we changed the program drastically a few times over the last few years. And what we offer in the program are kind of generally based on what ODN says the critical competencies are, without a lot of the business stuff. ODN has business skills in there, and we just don't have enough credit hours to work with. I don't want to make the program 90 hours long. It's 30 credit hours. The first 8 of the courses kind of roll together. So you're constantly re-looking at things you looked at previous courses. We've added in systems thinking and learning organizations as a critical competency. If we can't think systemically, if my students can't think systemically, then they can't help others think systemically. Right. So that's incorporated in every course, but they have kind of a basic course to kind of learn who Peter Checkland is and who Chris Argyris is, and some of these earlier folks who got us started about thinking about learning organizations and systems. We give them a basic outline of what the ODC field is all about. Some of the knowledge you should have, the use of tools, the different kinds of tools. We have classes that look at specifically leadership. And like I said earlier, the leadership course is org culture, leadership, and group dynamics rolled together because the 3 of them live together. If I teach somebody how to be a leader without putting it into a context, and I did leadership training in the military for years, if you don't put it into a context, then they have to learn that context when they go out and work. If I teach them org culture without the rest of the context, right, or group dynamics. So the 3 go together, and then those 3 concepts are rolled in every course they take right up until the end. And it may, depending on what they do for capstone, will be involved in that. They get a class on change leadership, specifically focusing on what are some of the tools and concepts we can use to lead change? We have a course that looks at innovations and creativity from a couple of perspectives. One is we need to become creative and innovative in how we do our work. We can't get locked into a single way of doing things, which in some cases happens. We need to relearn, we need to keep changing, we need to be able to mix and match what we use. And we also need to look at how organizations can be creative and innovative. And if we understand how that process works, then they can guide their client organizations through the process of becoming more innovative. We have a class on, which I think is one of the more critical ones that goes back to the Jerry Glover days, is assessing culture. Because we have a lot of tools you can take and give surveys out, but that really doesn't get at the depth of what culture is. If we really want to see what might need to be changed in culture, we need to get down on down at the lower levels and see how people behave, see how they interact, see what kinds of things drive their behaviors, and see if that matches what the organization thinks the culture is. We have a class on workforce development. It's not a training course. It's a program on looking at how do we at a global level look at where the workforce comes from? Where are the new employees? We've seen a lot of this with COVID is, we start slowly switching back to the traditional way of doing business, but people aren't going back to work. They're looking for something different. So where are those workers going to come from? And then we roll from the global level down to the national and industry level. And then finally, once you have them, how do we develop them? So we look at employee development as a macro process rather than actually, training programs.
Ryan wants to know, is there a graduate certificate available?
Yes, there is.
Okay.
The certificate, it's not listed yet as an online certificate, but it is available online fully. It's also available face-to-face. It's 4 classes, 12 credit hours, and it uses the core of the program. And because the classes are offered cyclically, the first semester you take the first 3 classes, the second semester you take the next 3, the third semester you take the last 3, and finally you take the capstone at the end. You can take, there's a couple of core you have to take as part of the certificate, and then the other 2 are up to you. In other words, you can customize it to meet your needs. And like I said, it's both available face-to-face or fully online.
And one would go to hpu.edu for more information.
You can click on the link that you had on that slide.
Yeah.
We're able to keep the program as current with the with the kinds of competencies we want people to have, but also still keeping the grounding of where we came from. One of the textbooks is the Cummings and Worley textbook on org development, and I used, I think, version 2 40 years ago. And the examples they use have changed, but the basic tenets haven't changed.
And now they're on the 10th edition, right?
No, they're on the 10th or 11th.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think there might be another one out.
Okay.
If we use those and we teach people, and this is one of the things came from the Army's OE program, is not a way to do things. We teach them a toolbox. We give them a whole series of skills they develop and they work with. And then when they go out and they work with somebody, they choose those things that they need that fit the situation, as opposed to trying to cram somebody into what I think, what my preferred way of doing business. So I want them to be flexible. They need to think on a very flexible scale, for lack of a better term. And they need to think systemically. They need to understand, they need to be able to look at something and see the connections, see the interactions. And then they can help those they're working with to understand how to map those and actually see the impact of what they do. If we don't look at the impact of the changes you make, if it's small organization, what happens to the rest of the organization, what happens to the environment? As you get larger and you begin to see the impacts it has on the greater environment around. If you get up onto the global level, what happens when nationally we change policies? And again, think about COVID. Think what's going on with COVID and how the United States isn't the only people who are having trouble with dealing with vaccinations and people doing the kinds of things they need to do to protect themselves. You know, usually if somebody says, you know, if you do this and it'll keep you alive, people listen to it, but then now they're not doing that as much. So how do we get people to think, what is causing these changes? What kinds of systemic impacts are creating people, are creating the view that this isn't right? We still got people saying it doesn't exist.
Right.
You know, that this was just something that was made up to give Big Pharma more money. You know, well, yes, the families of the 800,000 people who have died just in the United States, then we begin to see this isn't so true. So the communication and the message is being garbled. And that's what we need to be able to do. And we can't do it there's not a single process that'll make that happen. We need to think about a variety of different ways we can do that.
So Christian says the article he referenced was called, I'm not going to say the author's names because they're really hard to pronounce, but On Organizational Becoming, Rethinking Organizational Change. And it's from the Organization Science Journal from 2002. So if any of you want to check that out. Ken, I just want to thank you for your time today. I think this was very enlightening. At least it was for me. And actually people in the chat are saying that it was as well. Those that want to check into the MAODC program, here's some more information on it. Go to hpu.edu. I also want to just give a shout out on a book that I just came out with called You Can Create Positive Change at Work. So those who are interested, you can go to that website and order it. I also have our professional certificate in cultural competence. Our next one is coming out next month. If you're interested in checking that out. And here are some additional resources. ISODC has a LinkedIn group. We have a culture change and leadership LinkedIn group. And I have a bunch of videos on my YouTube page, a lot of cool videos related to OD and C. So you can check that out as well. And I just want to thank you, Dr. Ken Rossi, for your time today. And everyone is saying much mahalo for this great session today. So thank you so much.
Thank you.